Hello and welcome. Hopefully you can all hear me loud and clear. I'm Rowena Merritt and I'm talking to you currently from Kent, just outside London in the UK. I'm going to be talking about the COVID pandemic and how it can possibly use to create healthier habits. So I work for an organisation called the World Food Programme, which is part of the UN, part of the United Nations. The World Food Programme is probably best known for their food distribution programmes in some of the most, conflicted areas in the world and to some of the most vulnerable communities within the world. Earlier this year, we were very proud and humbled to say that we were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for 2020. Currently, we work in over 80 countries. So on the map, the blue spots are the countries in which we work in, and the red is the emergency areas. So I'm the Social Behaviour Change Advisor for the Regional Bureau in Cairo. And we cover a really large geographical area. So from Algeria all the way around to Tajikistan in Central Asia. Although we are best known for our food distribution programmes, we do a lot of other programmes of work also. We do school feeding, gender sensitivity programmes, we work with smallholder farmers, and we also do nutrition work. And it's the nutrition team that I sit within. In our region, we face this issue, which is classed as the triple burden of malnutrition, where we have high rates of stunting and undernutrition alongside large micronutrient deficiencies such as anemia, but we also have overweight and obesity. That's a little bit of a background about the organisation in which I work for, and I'm going to share with you how we have been thinking about using COVID to try and reprogram and create healthier habits. I sometimes struggle to remember a time before COVID-19. It kind of has dominated our life for nearly a year now. What was so striking for me was how quickly the whole world seemed to change. The whole world seemed to lock down. My last work trip was to Tajikistan at the end of February, beginning of March, and everything seemed pretty much normal at that point. You'd see the odd person wearing a face mask, but that was it. And then within just a few weeks, it was as if the whole world had locked down. COVID-19 has introduced us to so many new behaviours that we probably gave no or very little thought to before. For example, now it's not socially acceptable really anywhere in the world to shake hands when that was the most common greeting. We talk now about face masks and we have to think about wearing face masks when we even go to the shop or when we meet with colleagues. All of a sudden, we realised that we didn't wash our hands for 20 seconds and we probably weren't using soap and rubbing all different parts of our hands as thoroughly as we should have done. And this term social distancing, I'll be honest, I'd never even heard of it until COVID-19 came into play. I think the other thing for me, which has been really important, is that COVID has acted as a reminder about the dangers of being overweight and obese. We know that globally, obesity is this huge, epidemic that we're trying to deal with. And yet it was often very difficult to address and very difficult to talk about or talk openly about due to the stigma. I think for me, COVID-19 has put it back on the political agenda, this issue of obesity, and has really highlighted the risks of obesity, not just in relation to type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, etc., which we're very familiar with, but in relation to COVID fatalities. So obesity doubles the risk of hospitalisation for COVID-19 and increases the risk of dying by nearly 50%. And this is from global data. This is not just UK data. This is the obesity figures and overweight figures for the UK. As you can see, we've made very little progress, if any, arguably over the last few years. But obesity really isn't just a developed world problem. It is very prominent in developing countries. So Iraq is one of the countries I work in, and around 30% of the population are obese. So pretty similar figures to what we have in the UK. And another similar percentage are overweight. We've got a new study that is yet to be published, done by the World Food Programme and other UN partners, and it's finding very similar trends even within the refugee camps in Jordan, the Syria refugee camps. There are very high rates of obesity and growing rates of obesity and overweight. So it really is a problem for both the developed and the developing world. The final thing that changed for me in relation to COVID was it created a new way of life, a new way of living, a new way of working, a new way of schooling, homeschooling hell, that we had to endure for quite a long time. It disrupted our lives in so many ways. Now, for some people, this disruption created actually positive new habits. My husband was one of them. So before he used to commute 3 hours to London each day, all of a sudden he got to work from home. So he would do yoga stretching morning and night. He joined a local cycling club, and he basically created a load of new positive, healthy habits. However, for some people, COVID-19 resulted in them creating negative new habits. And I'm afraid I was one of them. So whilst my husband was out cycling and doing his yoga stretches, I was trying to juggle working full time with homeschooling these two. Now, they might look cute, especially dressed in his Harry Potter glasses and wand. They may look very sweet, but when you're trying to teach them phonics and fractions, and they really don't care about phonics and fractions, every day by 4:30, I would need a glass of wine or a gin and tonic. Now, before lockdown and before homeschooling, I would maybe have one glass of wine on a weekend or one gin and tonic on a weekend, and that would be it. I drank very little. But all of a sudden in lockdown, the days seemed to merge into one another. And yet by 4:30, after trying to homeschool and work, I always concluded that I definitely deserved a glass of wine. So sadly for me, COVID-19 created negative habits as opposed to positive habits in many respects. So what do I mean by habits, and why are they really important in relation to our day-to-day activities and ultimately our health outcomes? So whilst we might like to believe we are free-willed and self-governing, ultimately we are creatures of habit. We perform behaviours that are deeply entrenched and automatic without much, I suppose, if any, thinking about it. The classic example is about cleaning your teeth. Now, we probably all do this twice a day for around 2 minutes a day. But when you're cleaning your teeth, you're rarely thinking about health benefits of cleaning your teeth. You're just doing it because it's a habit. You normally do it at a set time or after a set activity each day, such as eating breakfast. Some studies have shown that actually 40% of our actions, our day-to-day actions, are habits, so these unconscious behaviours. However, some studies have actually said it's much higher. Even some studies have said it's 95%. So that only 5% of our activities are actually cognitive decisions or cognitive activities. The rest are done in a non-conscious manner. I don't know the exact figure, and whatever the exact figure is, I think we can conclude that it is high, and habits are really important in relation to a lot of our day-to-day activities. And this is potentially, arguably, why some campaigns, some public health campaigns, fail to impact. If you think about the classic 5-a-day campaign, Everybody knows now pretty much in the UK that you should eat 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. They can probably, a lot of people tell you what a portion looks like because we're told it's a handful, basically. So they've been successful in increasing knowledge, changing attitudes, etc. But as you can see from the graph, it's had very little, well, really no impact on our consumption of fruit and vegetables over the last nearly 2 decades. So by failing to address habits, that's probably where we're failing to get this sustainable behaviour change, or one of the reasons why we're failing to get this sustainable behaviour change. So this clever chap, I think he's from the USA, he wrote a book called The Power of Habit. And in the book, he talked about how habits are formed, and he talked about this habit formation loop. He said to create a new habit, or even to reprogram an existing habit, you've got to have a cue, like a prompt, something that triggers that habit loop. And then for it to become a routine, you have to have a reward, something that is ideally an immediate benefit that keeps you motivated to keep you on that habit loop. So if I give you an example of this, my father is 80 now. He's a good old age, but sadly, about 10 years ago, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is a neurological disease and it's degenerative. So there's no cure or fix for it. But there are medications, pharmaceutical interventions that can help manage some of the symptoms and to a certain extent, I suppose, slow progression of the disease. However, if you review the medical evidence, one of the best things to do to help self-manage your symptoms is to keep moving, to keep walking, to keep active. It's one of the best things you can do if you have Parkinson's. So my father, every day after the lunchtime news, come rain or shine, he will go for a walk, and he will walk around the village where we live in Kent. But what's really important is his rewards is not necessarily the health benefits he gets in relation to his Parkinson's, but on his way home, he always stops at the corner shop and he buys a cornetto and ice cream, and he eats that for the remainder of his walk. And it's that ice cream, that reward, that basically triggers that habit loop. So the news is the prompt, the news finishing is the prompt, but the ice cream is the reward. And I suppose it's a bit like cleaning our teeth. We clean our teeth because we know we want good oral health and we know about the importance and the health benefits. But when we're cleaning our teeth, we're probably not really thinking about those health benefits. In fact, we might just be thinking, have I got time to do X or Y before I have to drop the kids off at school, or whatever it might be. Ultimately, it is that health aspect that motivates teeth cleaning as well as motivates my father's walking. But it's those immediate benefits such as the ice cream or having fresh breath that motivates the teeth cleaning or the walking in this example. So we recognise that if we want people to improve health outcomes, if we want to tackle the nutritional issues that we have within the region where I work, we have to think about people's habits, their existing habits, and we have to try and create new positive habit loops to get people to change their behaviour sustainably. So I'm going to give you an example of how we did this in Tajikistan. So I'm not sure if any of you have been to Tajikistan. It's a country in Central Asia. It's absolutely beautiful. It's part of the Silk Road. So it's beautiful with mountains everywhere. It borders lots of countries. It's very landlocked. It borders Afghanistan, China, Kyrgyzstan, I think, and Uzbekistan. I think, don't quote me on that. My geography is not great. But basically, it's a very landlocked, beautiful country. In Tajikistan, as with many places around the world, this is not a problem unique to Tajikistan, but people think they wash their hands really, really well, when in fact they don't wash their hands very well. And they often fail to use soap when washing their hands, if they actually wash their hands at all. And when they wash their hands, they tend to just throw them under the tap for a few seconds, and then that's it. So we recognise that good hand hygiene, first of all, is important in relation to protecting against COVID-19. WHO talk about good hand hygiene as being one of the key measures to protect yourself against coronavirus. But it's also really important from a nutritional perspective, because basically we were experiencing very high rates of diarrhea because of lack of hand hygiene within Tajikistan. And of course, high rates of diarrhea in children lead to micronutrient deficiencies, underweight, etc. So we tried to think, well, how can we use this concept of a habit loop to get people to wash their hands with soap and water at critical times, such as after using the toilet, before preparing food, etc. So in relation to the cue, first of all, we did very practical physical reminders to prompt people to make that behaviour change. The first one, because we had very little budget, the first one was to just spray paint footprints leading from the toilet, because it's an outdoor toilet, to the wash basin, which is also outdoors within these households. We also physically put soap dishes, like soap containers, next to the sink, so the soap could always stay next to the sink. Because currently, when we started this project, soap was predominantly reserved for guests, and therefore it was kept in the house. So when you went to wash your hands, it wasn't physically there, so you didn't bother using the soap. So we did these physical prompts to try and encourage behaviour change. But in addition to this, we tried to do some psychological prompts to create a cue that people would react to. So we tried to create a discomfort, this concept that actually, if you don't wash your hands with soap and water, your hands are still filthy. And commercial companies do this a lot. This is a picture from a commercial company. And we did a very similar type of image, but cockroaches are less of an issue in Tajikistan. But flies, summertime, so many flies in that part of the world, a bit like the outback. That's the only place where I've experienced so many flies before, flies everywhere. And so we did the image, a similar-ish image, but with flies instead of cockroaches, to try and create this sense of discomfort, this sense of doubt. Am I really washing my hands as well as I should be washing my hands in people's minds? I suppose we were trying to create a cognitive dissonance, basically. We also did a very simple image showing how easily the coronavirus is passed on everyday objects. So we had a picture of an adult passing their child a ball. And so it was just communicating that this virus can be spread and to try and create this discomfort. The other thing we did, because it's very difficult with germs because they're invisible. So we had to try and make germs visible. And the way we did this, because there's no mass media there for us to use, we're working in very rural, isolated communities. So there's no social media, there's no mass media, there's no even phones that we can necessarily send text messages to within the villages we're working. So we basically had someone go around and get people to wash their hands and then use this kind of hand gel and a UV light to highlight where the germs were on their hands. And I like to think that I'm quite neurotic when it comes to hand hygiene, but even my fingernails were filthy when we did this activity within the villages. I was very embarrassed how filthy my own hands were. So that was in relation to the cue, the prompt to try and get this new habit loop formed. But we also had to think really importantly about the reward. Now, I come from a social marketing background. So for me, the reward is absolutely vital. If you want people to change their behavior, you have to give them something better than they're currently getting. So what I mean by that is people always get benefits from doing negative behaviors. So if you think about smoking, yes, there are no health benefits from smoking whatsoever. But there are psychological benefits in that it might help people feel more relaxed, or it might help people get me time away from their children if they go outside to smoke. It might make young people feel as if they fit in with their peers, or that they feel more sophisticated because they smoke. Alcohol is another great example. I've done lots of projects around alcohol around the world, and actually it's very consistent what people tell me. Young people say we drink alcohol because it makes us feel more confident and attractive and sexy. And we want young people to feel all those things. We just don't want them to feel it with alcohol. So that's why I'm saying if you want people to change their behavior, you have to understand the benefits they get from the negative behavior and replace or give them something even better. Now, these benefits are rarely monetary benefits. They are normally psychological benefits, such as a sense of belonging, or a feeling of sophistication, or a status symbol. Commercial companies are really good to look at if you want to understand the psychological rewards and the promises, the psychological promises that they make. I could have chosen 1,000,001 commercial brands to show. I chose Red Bull just because I was writing the slides whilst watching the Formula One at the weekend, so it was on my mind, obviously. But Red Bull says, you know, it gives you wings. Now, of course, Red Bull doesn't really physically give you wings. That would be amazing if it did. But it's this psychological benefit. Coke and Pepsi always communicate these psychological benefits. So does Kit Kat, etc. So in relation to the work we did in Tajikistan, for the reward, this is what caused us a little bit of difficulty trying to think, well, actually, what would the reward be? We thought at first we could maybe take a more commercial marketing approach, and they often talk about the reward of washing your hands with soap is that sense of deep clean in that it smells good, or it makes a lovely lava and froths. You know, with shampoo adverts, there used to be an advert that talked about hair being squeaky clean. Of course, it's probably not great for your hair to be squeaky clean, but it was that psychological benefit of having a really deep clean. But sadly, the soap that we were dealing with in Tajikistan wasn't that great. In that, from a hygiene point of view, it was fine. It did the job, but it didn't smell nice. It didn't really look nice. And so we couldn't really communicate that concept of lovely frothy soap that smells like jasmine on the hands, because it really didn't tick any of those boxes. We also didn't want to do something that would stigmatize and make people feel bad, because, you know, soap costs money. We need people to prioritize it and buy it, but we didn't want to create a negative stigma. But when we were doing the formative research, one thing kept coming out again and again. Now, people live in these small villages, and everybody knows everybody. They live in these multi-generational households, and everybody kind of has an opinion on everybody else's business. This often made mothers very conscious of gossip and didn't want to be seen as somebody who was gossiped about, but did want to be seen as somebody who was doing something to be proactive and really caring for their children. So in the end, the reward became a status symbol. And what we did is, very simply, we got families to pledge. And once they pledged to wash their hands with soap and water for 20 seconds, basically, after critical times, such as using the toilet, before preparing food and so on, they got a certificate. And each of the family members signed this certificate. The children also got their own kid-friendly certificate, as you can see with this gorgeous little boy in the picture here showing off his certificate. To try and create a sense of social norm within the villages and to encourage people to realise that their neighbours were pledging to do this healthier behaviour, we actually made sure these certificates were displayed in areas where passers-by within the village could see it. So on the front door of someone's house, or on the shed where it was the other villagers could see. So it was very clearly communicating two things. One, this household is sophisticated. They're taking pride in hand hygiene and protecting their children. But also it was a very cheap form, I suppose, of social norming to say, well, actually, X% of households within this village has taken the pledge. So, as I said, we didn't have mass media or any of those tools to plan. So it might seem very basic, but it was what we could do within the resources and the financial limitations. But it's what worked also for these rural villages we were working in. So just to explain the habit loop that we were dealing with. So as I said, the cue was not just the physical prompts, but also this sense of discomfort, creating this cognitive dissonance. The routine was washing their hands with soap and water, but the reward was this status, this recognition of being advanced and being proud within their village. Now, just to share with you the results are based on observations as opposed to self-reported data, because with the self-reported data, we realised that everybody just said they wash their hands with soap and water all the time, because they knew they should, but they didn't. And when we did the observations, nobody was really washing their hands with soap and water. So all the results I'm going to share now are basically based on observation data. So when we did the baseline, COVID-19 was talked about because we did it in February. So we knew about COVID-19, but it hadn't really spread to Central Asia at all. There was no confirmed cases in Tajikistan whatsoever. It was known about, but it wasn't really worried about, if I'm being honest. So as you can see at baseline in both the control and intervention groups, it was pretty similar, like a very small percentage washing their hands with soap and water at critical times. However, by the time we collected the follow-up data, COVID had really hit Tajikistan quite hard. And by that time, there were other campaigns going on, run by the government, run by some of our UN partners, national campaigns to try and increase the uptake of hand hygiene. COVID was talked about, COVID was worried about. So a lot of things had changed. However, really positively, even though there was an increase in the control group of people washing their hands with soap and water, it was nothing compared to the intervention group. In the intervention group, the behaviour change was so much more prominent, and we have gone back since. People are still in the intervention group washing their hands with soap and water. So it looks like for now we've successfully managed to reprogram or create new positive habits around hand hygiene, using COVID-19 as a positive catalyst for change. Finally, we recognise that COVID-19 doesn't just give us the potential to make positive changes in relation to hand hygiene, but also it creates an opportunity to do positive changes in relation to obesity and overweight issues that we are trying to deal with in many of the countries I'm working in. We recognise that the lockdown basically stopped people going out, and so it forced people to change their habits, and it also, as I mentioned before, brought obesity back on the political agenda and a conversation that people were happening again. So we're actually doing the break in lockdown to try and set up national campaigns in both Jordan and Iraq. The campaign in Jordan is trying to reduce sugar consumption, which is a major issue there, in particular around fizzy drinks, you know, Pepsi and the light consumption. And in Iraq, we're trying to do it by focusing on cooking oil, getting them to reduce cooking oil usage, because often in Iraq, they take beautiful, healthy products and they deep fat fry them, basically. So they take a healthy vegetable and they manage to make it unhealthy. I have to say, Iraq is the best food I've ever tasted in the world. So it is very tasty, the food, but sadly, it is made with too much oil. So that is all my slides, and thank you very much for listening, and I'll stop now to see if anybody's got any questions at all. Thank you. How do governments handle the problem of alienating segments and creating additional inequalities? Because different simple groups aren't in the same position to start their fresh start in relation to obesity. Yeah, that's you know, that's a really important point. I think, if I'm being honest, the work that I do with the World Food Programme, the beneficiaries that we work with are from the most deprived, vulnerable communities. So we are, we don't work with, you might say, the middle classes or the people in the middle of the social economic spectrum. We just, all our activities and programmes are very much focused to our beneficiaries, which are in the lower social economic groups. So in relation to the work we do, I don't think that's such a problem. But in relation to governments, generally, yes, I think if we take the example of smoking within the UK, I think though we have reduced smoking rates over the years, I think we've managed to create huge stigmatization and basically alienated and created the problem for the lower social economic groups, for sure. So we have alienated. I think the key, that there's no magic bullet for this. There's no one size fits all approach for this. I think it's doing all the things that I know you do anyway, Fiona, with your work, in that we are actively co-creating, we're piloting things to make sure that we don't increase that stigma. And we don't just take a one size fits all approach, and we do top down as well as bottom up activities. I don't think there is really, in my opinion, a simple alternative. If I just think about the national campaign we're doing in Jordan, we're setting up in Jordan. So we are doing a lot of top-down activities. We're already in discussions with government departments around changing what can be bought in schools. We're talking with them around sugar taxes, ban on advertising, etc. Whilst at the same time, we are working with the most vulnerable communities to try and create more community-based social marketing campaigns and activities. So we're trying to do that bottom up as well as the top down, so we can try and get some local ownership and co-design. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, question, Fiona, but that's how we're doing it.